cities. Primarily the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, and also the city of These have always been in question because there's no reference to Sodom and Gomorrah in any of the archaic idols. Herodotus doesn't talk about Sodom and Gomorrah, neither does Thucydides, the great historians that we are dependent on for the ancient world. I would expect Herodotus and Thucydides to have known of these cities because they had been long destroyed, long before that time. Nonetheless, they are significant enough, there should be some reference to them somewhere. The other great criticism concerns the person of Abraham. Many historians believe the first 11 chapters are not historical, and certainly the character Abraham is not historical. Why? Because much of the writing, in fact all the writing we have about Abraham are dependent on a person named Moses, who supposedly wrote in the 1400s, the 15th century. But the problem, even historians believe that there was no writing that early. Now that has been completely destroyed. In fact, in the next room, there are some writings, there's some tablet material that goes back to 5000 BC. Nobody, no longer, very few people any longer believe that there was no writing at the time of Moses. What we need to ask is, did Moses get it correct? Did he get what Abraham said was correct? Or what Abraham did was correct? Now, many historians believe that much of the Old Testament was probably written in the 5th century or later. 6th century or 5th century or later, not before the 6th century. And then it was redacted back to the time of Moses, and then even further back to the time of Abraham in 1900 BC. That's what you're hearing at many universities. If that were the case, then you would expect anybody writing in the 6th century to have gotten many errors, many things wrong with what happened in the time of Abraham. But since we don't know what happened in the time of Abraham, it's pretty safe to say that. That was until the tablets started showing up. No reading. Okay, sorry about that. That was until these tablets started showing up. And there have been 4 genres of tablets that have suddenly come onto the world stage that are now starting to unlock that time period. We have the Nuzi tablets from Mesopotamia, you have the Mari tablets from the Euphrates Valley, you have the Ebla tablets from what is today Syria, and then you have the Amarna tablets that you see here from Egypt. Let's look at these tablets, because these tablets now are unlocking an awful lot of the material that is going to help corroborate what we see in the Genesis account. One thing good about tablets is they don't deteriorate. As you can see, these are from 1400 BC, 1394 to be exact, and look how pristine they are. They don't deteriorate. They don't wear out. And that's why they're great as repositors. They don't want you to eat, sorry. As repositors of history. And let's go back at the bottom of your page and let's start with the Mari tablets. The Mari tablets from the Euphrates Valley mention things like Arioch, which is found in Genesis 14. They mention the towns of Nahor and Haran, which is found in Genesis 24, verse 10. As well as names such as Benjamin and the Haperim. Hold on to that word Haperim. We're going to come back to that. Let's turn the page to page 9. What's more exciting were the Nuzi tablets that were discovered. The Nuzi tablets were written between 2000 BC and 1800 BC. And they were written in the same area that Abraham would have lived. In the same time period that Abraham would have lived. He's from 1900 BC. And when they looked and discovered these tablets written in cuneiform, as they started deciphering them, they started coming across custom after custom that exactly paralleled what we find in the biblical story. Such as you see this here on page 9. Both the Nuzi tablets and the Bible speak about a barren wife who gives a handmaiden to her husband. You find that in the story of Hagar. That a bride is chosen for the son by the father. You find that in the story of Rebekah. That a dowry is paid to the father-in-law. You find that in the story of Jacob, along with the work that is done to pay off the dowry. The unchanging moral will of a father is found in the story of Isaac, and that a father gives his daughter a slave girl, that you find in the story of Leah and Rachel. And if there's a sentence of death for stealing a cult god, you find that in the story of Jacob. These are exactly parallel to the biblical account. But here's what's interesting. After the 1800s, most of these customs were out of date. They no longer were used. So how could someone in the 6th century have known of these customs and have got them so accurate? Because they no longer existed in the 6th century. What is more interesting, they didn't even exist at the time of Moses. What's more, Moses wasn't living there. He would have known nothing about these customs. So, 2 questions need to be asked. First of all, if the historians believe that these were written in the 6th century and redacted back to the 19th century, how did they get the customs so accurate, unless they were living at that time? But then you need to ask them, how did Moses get it so accurate? Because he wasn't living at that time, nor was he living at that place. Yet he gets every one of these customs right. Well, I'll let you come to your conclusions on that. But that's how accurate the Bible is proving to be. Let's ask about those two cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. We want to solve that problem as well. What are we going to do with these two cities? There's no reference to them. They should be pretty important. Obviously, they're important in the Genesis account, but they're not referred to in any ancient material. That was until they came across one of these mounds in the desert that we talked about downstairs. These tells, called Tel Marduk in this case, in Syria. When they came to this tell, they started digging down. As they dug down, they came to the 2300-year period, 2300 BC. That's 400 years before Abraham. When they came to that period in the sand, they found an entire city that had been abandoned. As they started digging out different buildings, they came across one building and one room in that building whose roof had imploded on itself, and on the floor of that room were 17,000 tablets. As they started looking at these tablets and deciphering, much like the tablets you see up here, they came across one tablet that mentioned 5 cities: Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zebulun, and Zoar. You've heard those cities before, haven't you? That's the first reference we have for Sodom and Gomorrah anywhere in the world, and they come from the city of Ebla that is 400 before the time of Abraham, proving that in that time period, in 2300 BC, those two cities existed. But what is more interesting, that not only corroborates the fact that Sodom and Gomorrah are historical, what is more interesting is the sequence of those 5 cities: Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zebulun, and Zoar. Have you heard that before? You have if you read your Bible. In Genesis chapter 14, verse 8. Read Genesis chapter 14, verse 8, and you get the same 5 cities in the exact same order that we find on the Ebla tablet, proving there's something significant about that order. What do you think it is? Why is it that they're written in that order? You talk about the great cities of the Levant. We're in a room here about the Levant, and you talk about Basra, Baghdad, Damascus, Jerusalem, Cairo. What have I just done? And what am I doing? Trade route. It's a trade route. I'm putting them on a map. I'm showing you where they exist on a map. And that's the trade route that you use. You start at Basra, go to Baghdad, come up to Damascus, start coming down to Jerusalem, and end up in Cairo. And you do that big circle. And that's the trade route of the Levant. Everybody knows that trade route, and that's why you always put them in that sequence. What this is suggesting is that this is a sequence of cities on a trade route, proving that Sodom and Gomorrah were on that trade route. We know where Admah is today. We know where Zebulun is today. We know where Zoar. They still exist today. They're in present-day Iraq. If you put Sodom and Gomorrah before them, and they end up somewhere in the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea has grown and grown and grown over the centuries. That's why there's no reference to them. What is interesting, however, is that they suggest, therefore, that these were the 5 cities, the same 5 cities that Abraham went to destroy the kings to rescue his nephew Lot. That's why they're there in Genesis 14. But if they are a trade route, as the tablet suggests, then how could Moses have known about this? Because Moses was not living at that time. These cities were not on the trade route at that time. He probably never even heard their names before, yet he gets them that accurate to put them in that sequence, proving just how accurate our Bible is. Now, I don't ask it to be that accurate. It just so happens to be. But isn't it great? Isn't it good? In one fell swoop, with one little tablet, we're not only corroborating the existence of these two cities, we're also corroborating how accurate our Old Testament is. Thank God. I think he knew that this was going to be a battle, and I think he knew that we were going to have this question. I think he left that tablet there just for us to discover in that sequence so that we can put the 2 and 2 together and we can be proud of what we were reading. Okay? The governor there in Canaan, or in Phoenicia as it is known then, writing back to the Pharaoh who lived in Amarna. At that time, Amarna was the capital of Egypt. And it mentions on the tablets that there are these barbaric people living in the mountains coming down to the plains, that they're destroying the cities on the plains, but they're leaving some of the cities alone. What does that parallel? And where have you heard that before? Joshua. That sounds like Joshua, doesn't it? In fact, if you look at the dates, you will see they're the exact same dates as the Joshua account. Remember Joshua came from the mountains, he came down to the plains, he destroyed Jericho, Ai, and then the Ebionites come to him. They have dusty clothes, or they have dirty sandals. They say, we've traveled a long distance, we'd like to have an alliance with you. He agrees to alliance, shakes their hands, or whatever they did to agree, and then they turn around and say, well, actually, we're right next door. You can't go back on your alliance. And he did. He left them alone. Supporting exactly what we see on these Amarna tablets from the same time period, proving that this event did happen. Now, let's see what the British Museum does with this, because the British Museum is the most secular of institutions. They are not interested in proving anything that's biblical. That's not their remit. Let's see what they say. Up here, it says the Amarna tablets, or letters, make reference to the Hopadu. Remember I said we come back to the Hopadu? These are the same people that are referred to in the Marmee tablets. the Hapadim, depicted as roving bands of stateless people, based in the hill country and conducting raids on cities. These alternate kingdoms form the basis of the biblical Hebrews. What in the world is the British Museum admitting something that they really have no right to admit unless they're coming to the same conclusion we're coming to? As they look downstairs and they see what Chamonix III, how accurate that is with the story there in 2 Kings chapter 22 and 1 Kings chapter 9 and 10. As they see Tiglath-Pileser and see how that accurate that is with 2 Kings chapter 17 and 1 Chronicles chapter 5. As they go and see Sargon II and Sennacherib and see how accurate the Bible is in every one of these characters, can you see they're coming to the same conclusions that we've been coming to? Why not call them the Hapadim or Hebrew, depending on where you put the vowels? You can add the vowels or take it away you want. These are all consonantal texts. So if the British Museum is going to suggest that these are biblical Hebrews, why should we deny them? Good stuff, isn't it? I love it. That's why it's so good as we look at this material. The more they scratch, the more they find.